The next point is sort of summarizing what was just said, is that through the act of self-deprecation, this internalization of the oppressor consciousness among members of the oppressed population is the belief that the professor has knowledge, Jason knows, right? And that I, the student, or in an oppressive population, in a sort of plantation system, the peasant, don't know, I'm ignorant, right? If you are engaged in this discourse, right, with me specifically, watching these videos specifically to better yourself, then that's great, right? That's the point of it. That's the point of education, right? That's the point of educational pedagogy, is for you to better yourself. However, there has to really be a continual exchange of information. It can't always be the case that I'm giving. It can't always be the case that you're receiving. There has to be instances in which there are things that you have, there's information that you have that I can have, right? And this is why in not many, but in some of my videos I ask for help, right? Hey, there's something that I don't know. I don't profess to know everything. Can someone help me about stuff? I want to go on the internet and watch videos about stuff that I don't understand, right? So it's always has to be an ongoing dialogue, a dialectic. And what we'll end up seeing in a few minutes is exactly how that process of dialogue unfolds in an oppressed community, right? It is specifically this idea of the unfolding of dialogue that allows the oppressed population to establish trust, and also a potential convert to establish trust, right? This dialogue is the foundation, the very foundation for the establishment of trust. Okay. All right. The next point at the top of page 12. Once the oppressed recognize the mechanism of their oppression, right? Once they recognize this system, the oppressed recognize the system of their oppression, they recognize the nature of their exploitation, right? They recognize the nature of their exploitation, and I'll make sense of this, right? It is to no surprise that the way in which the oppressor maintains power, the way in which the oppressor maintains a sense of power, is that the oppressor tells a story, a very intoxicating narrative, right? The oppressor here says that you're ignorant because I have knowledge and you don't. The oppressor says that you're lazy because I worked to get this knowledge and you didn't. The oppressor says that I am active and you're not. You're passive. You're just waiting. All of this, right? All of this is a myth. It's a mythology. And why? All of this is a mythology that is projected toward a member of the oppressed group, so that the oppressed group will internalize this self-deprecation. Right? The reason why I say, oh, you're lazy, you don't do anything, you're not working hard enough, you're not smart enough, you're not applying yourself, whatever it might be, is because I'm hoping, as the oppressor, that me continually berating you with the lack that I see of proficiency, lack of work ethic, whatever it might be, is a result of this inherent laziness that an individual has, right? So the point is the first point of transformation, the first point of liberation among members of the oppressed group is once they recognize, right, that my self-deprecation is a result of this. And this is exploitation. E-X-P-O. This is exploitation, right? The exploitation is told to members of the oppressed group to make them believe, not that it's an act of exploitation, but all that I'm saying is what's true. You are inherently lazy. You are inherently passive. You are inherently ignorant, right? Which is false, right? Which is obviously false, right? So what ends up happening is we recognize inherency. The inherency of these traits is a lie. The oppressed population recognize that the inherency of these traits is a lie. It's not that I'm inherently lazy. It's not that I'm inherently ignorant. It's not that I'm inherently passive. It's that you have told me this to further exploit me, right? And it's at that moment, it's that instance of recognition that members of the oppressed group can liberate themselves from this continual and perpetual self-deprecation, right? Genius, right? It's Freire. Very good point. Very good point. Next, the oppressed assume power is immutable. They assume that power is beyond challenge. They put the oppressor on a pedestal, and insofar as the oppressor sits on this pedestal, we assume, as oppressed populations, that we cannot access the knowledge that the oppressor has. I'm not that smart. People say that all the time, right? I'm not that smart. As if to say the oppressor just has this natural inclination towards being smart, right? Not like the oppressor, didn't have access to information and spent hundreds of hours reading and processing information, right? It's not that the oppressor is just inherently smart, but the oppressor has certain privileges, right? Certain privileges that have not been accessible to members of the oppressed group, and obviously those privileges have been put in place to maintain a certain sense of authority, of power, of control, right? This imbalance of power is always prone to change, right? If I'm here as a member of the oppressed, and we have the pedestal, and the oppressor is here, we assume that power trickles down in what's known as a top-down, right? A top-down, an up-down approach, right? Power comes from the top down. Power begins at the top, at the height, and it trickles down, right? That's the assumption. This is exactly what Freire is challenging, right? Because if power trickles down, right? If it's the case that power originates from the top and is directed downward, then there is no power that, there's no power that members of the oppressor population answer to, right? They are the source, prima facie, on this example, from power, right? So that we still have what philosophers have a cool trick, and this is why I love being a philosopher. You just have to do the Aristotle move and put NESS on anything, and now it becomes really, really analytic, right? So you do, like, I would call it fromness, right? I would call it fromness. Information is coming from me to you because I know and you don't know. If I make that assumption, as I said before, then I become active, you become passive. Then I become the warehouse for knowledge and you become the receptacle, right? Then you have to wait on me, which is completely false because I learn so much from you guys. I get emails from you guys all the time. Hey, Dr. Campbell, this and that, blah, blah, blah. Let's do some work together, let's collaborate together, and it's a huge party. Because I don't assume that I'm in a position of knowing. I think there's some things that I do know. I recognize there's a whole bunch of stuff I don't know, being a good philosopher, and I engage in discourse. If you assume that power can't be changed, if you assume that power is immutable, then what you're saying is that there couldn't be a condition in which the oppressor gains information from something else. So it becomes the locus of power. Power is prima facie manifested within the quote-unquote upper class, and it trickles down. That fromness, if you will, and that's my term, not Freire's term, that projected towards creates inherently passivity, dependency in a population, and this is exactly where his discussion evolves, right? We recognize that this activity versus passivity can be transformed easily, and it is transformed easily into a state of dependency. And obviously in a state of dependency, the population is at the will. The longevity, sustainability, the livelihood of the population becomes contingent on the quote-unquote false generosity or false charity of the oppressor.